My stepmom took my side in court, until she saw what I did with the house. Chapter 1. The Inheritance. Santa Barbara morning light filtered through the tall windows of the courtroom, casting long shadows across the polished oak floor. Lucas Harlan adjusted his navy tie and smoothed down the front of his tailored gray suit, a stark contrast to his slightly disheveled appearance most days. At 37, the fine lines around his piercing blue-gray eyes had deepened, particularly in the 8 months since his father's passing. "All rise," the bailiff announced. Lucas stood, his gaze drifting to the other side of the courtroom, where his half-brother, Mark, sat with an expression of entitled impatience. The resemblance between them was minimal. Mark had inherited their father's broad shoulders and commanding presence, while Lucas possessed their father's intellect and artistic sensibility, evident in his career as an architect. "You okay?" Julia Matthews whispered beside him. Her warm brown eyes reflected concern beneath expertly arched eyebrows. She'd pulled her chestnut hair into a professional bun, though a few strands had escaped, framing her face. As both his childhood friend and now his attorney, she knew exactly what this moment meant to him. "I'm fine," Lucas replied, his voice steadier than he felt. The truth was, nothing about this felt fine. After Richard Harlan's unexpected heart attack, the battle over his estate had turned brutal. The oceanfront mansion in Santa Barbara, one where Lucas had spent his formative years, had become the focal point of an ugly inheritance dispute. According to the will, the property was to be divided equally between the half-brothers, but Mark was pushing for a sale and immediate division of assets. "We're not selling," Lucas had insisted from the beginning. The house held too many memories, too much of his past. It was the last connection to his mother, who had died when he was just 8 years old. Judge Patricia Reynolds entered and took her seat. "Be seated," she instructed, shuffling through papers before addressing the courtroom. "We're here today to continue proceedings regarding the estate of Richard Harlan, specifically the disposition of the residential property at 415 Shoreline Drive." As the opposing attorney began his opening statement, Lucas felt a gentle hand on his shoulder. He turned to find Elaine, his stepmother, sliding into the seat behind him. In her early 50s, she carried herself with the same elegance and poise that had first attracted his father 15 years ago. Her blonde hair was styled in soft waves, and her emerald green suit complemented her fair complexion. "I didn't think you'd come," Lucas whispered, genuine surprise in his voice. Elaine leaned forward. "There are some things worth showing up for," she replied softly, her gaze direct and unwavering. Their relationship had always been complicated. After his mother's death, Lucas had resented any woman who tried to take her place. When his father married Elaine, Lucas was already in college, making it easier to keep his distance. They maintained a cordial but distant relationship, exchanging pleasantries at family gatherings but never truly connecting. "Mr. Harlan's position," Mark's attorney continued, "is that the property should be sold immediately. The current market valuation of $7.8 million would provide both heirs with substantial proceeds." Lucas clenched his jaw. To Mark, it was just another asset, another number in his portfolio. "Ms. Matthews, your response, Judge," Reynolds prompted. Julia stood, commanding the room with practiced confidence. "Your Honor, my client contests the forced sale. The Shoreline Drive property has been in the Harlan family for 3 generations. Mr. Lucas Harlan grew up in this home and has deep emotional ties to it. Furthermore, he is prepared to buy out his half-brother's interest over time, allowing Mr. Mark Harlan to receive his fair share while preserving the family legacy." As Julia laid out the details of Lucas's proposal, he noticed Mark's dismissive smirk. His half-brother had never understood what the house meant. How the salt-tinged air reminded Lucas of early morning walks with his mother, or how the creaking third step on the back porch marked every summer evening of his childhood. The proceedings continued with financial experts and property appraisers. During a brief recess, Lucas stepped into the hallway for air, leaning against the cool marble wall. "You know he's doing this out of spite," Elaine said, approaching him with 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to Lucas. Mark always resented how much Richard loved that house, how much he loved the life he had there with your mother. Lucas accepted the coffee, surprised by her candor. I didn't think you'd want to acknowledge that part of Dad's life. Elaine's lips curved into a small, sad smile. I'm not naive. Lucas, I knew who I married, a widower who kept his first wife's photograph on his desk until the day he died. She took a sip of her coffee. But that doesn't mean I can't recognize when something is important to you. Before Lucas could respond, Julia appeared at the doorway. They're calling us back in. As they returned to the courtroom, Lucas felt a new sense of unease. Elaine's sudden support felt foreign, almost suspicious. For 15 years, she'd been a peripheral figure in his life, pleasant but distant. Now, she was offering an olive branch when he needed it most. The judge called Elaine to testify about the property's significance to the family. To Lucas's astonishment, she spoke eloquently about the house's importance to him specifically. Richard always intended for Lucas to have that house, she stated firmly. He told me so many times. It was where Lucas's mother lived, where Lucas grew up. Mark already received the company shares and the property in Aspen. This house, this was meant for Lucas. Mark's face darkened with each word, his knuckles white as he gripped the table before him. When court adjourned for the day, Lucas felt cautiously optimistic. Outside on the courthouse steps, with the Pacific Ocean visible in the distance, he turned to Elaine. Thank you, he said simply. I don't understand why you're helping me, but, thank you. Elaine adjusted her designer handbag on her shoulder. Maybe it's time we both stopped living in the past, Lucas, we're family. Whether you've ever wanted to acknowledge that or not. As she walked away, toward her sleek silver Mercedes, Lucas turned to Julia. Can we trust her? He asked quietly. Julia watched Elaine's retreating figure. I don't know, but right now, she's the best ally you've got. The California sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink that reflected off the courthouse windows. Tomorrow would bring another day of battle, another step closer to either securing or losing the only place Lucas had ever truly called home. What will you do if you win? Julia asked as they descended the stairs together. Lucas's gaze drifted toward the ocean. Make it mine, he answered, a subtle edge to his voice that Julia hadn't heard before. Truly mine. What he didn't say, what he couldn't yet bring himself to admit was that his plans for the house might shock them all, perhaps Elaine most of all. But some truths were better kept hidden, at least until victory was secured. If you're captivated by family dramas that explore the complicated terrain of inheritance, loss, and unexpected alliances, make sure to subscribe to our channel. Chapter 2 will reveal the court's decision and the first cracks in Lucas and Elaine's newfound alliance. Hit that subscribe button to continue this journey through a family's most guarded secrets and deepest wounds. What would you fight for if it was the last connection to someone you loved? Chapter 2. Unexpected. Alias. The final day of court proceedings dawned with an unusual June gloom hanging over Santa Barbara. Fog rolled in from the ocean, shrouding the courthouse in a misty gray veil that matched Lucas's mood. He'd barely slept, his mind racing with contingency plans and worst-case scenarios. You look terrible, Julia observed, handing him a cup of strong black coffee as they met on the courthouse steps. She wore a charcoal pantsuit today, her professional armor for what promised to be a decisive battle. Thanks for the vote of confidence, Lucas replied, taking a grateful sip. The bitter liquid burned his throat. A welcome sensation that helped clear the fog from his mind. Julia studied him with the focused attention she'd had since they were kids. This isn't just about the house anymore, is it? She asked quietly. Lucas averted his gaze, watching as Elaine's Mercedes pulled up to the curb. It never was, he admitted. Inside, the courtroom had the hushed anticipation of a theater before the final act. Mark and his attorney huddled in intense conversation, occasionally casting glances toward Lucas's table. Mark's wife, Vanessa, former model with a permanently dissatisfied expression, sat primly behind them, scrolling through her phone with manicured fingers. "All rise," the bailiff announced as Judge Reynolds entered. The morning proceeded with closing arguments. Mark's attorney emphasized the financial impracticality of Lucas's proposal and questioned his ability to maintain such a valuable property. On an architect's salary, Julia countered with a detailed financial plan showing Lucas could indeed afford the buyout. Bolstered by his recent partnership at one of Los Angeles's most prestigious architectural firms. When Elaine was called for final testimony, she approached the stand with composed dignity. Her cream-colored blouse and tailored pants exuded quiet confidence as she settled into the witness chair. "Mrs. Harlan," Mark's attorney began, "isn't it true that your husband expressed concerns about his younger son's financial responsibility?" Elaine's expression remained neutral, though something flickered in her eyes. "Reimagined how, exactly?" Lucas hesitated only briefly before retrieving his messenger bag. "Let me show you." He cleared space on the kitchen island and unrolled the architectural renderings he'd been refining for months. The plans showed the same house footprint, but with dramatic modernizing changes: walls removed to create more open spaces, expanded windows to maximize the ocean views, a redesigned roofline, and contemporary materials throughout. "I'm keeping the core structure," Lucas explained eagerly, pointing out various features, but opening it up, bringing in more light, creating spaces that flow together rather than remaining so formally separated. His finger traced the back of the property. "And here, I'm adding a studio where I can work from home, overlooking the water." Elaine studied the plans silently, her face growing increasingly pale. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "You're erasing her." The accusation hung in the air between them. "What?" "No, this is your mother's house, Lucas. Every detail, every color choice, every piece of furniture was selected by her." Elaine's voice strengthened, edged with disbelief. "And you're planning to gut it?" Lucas straightened, defensive now. "I'm not gutting it, I'm evolving it. Making it functional for today, instead of preserving it like some kind of museum." "Is that why you fought so hard for it? So you could destroy what's left of her?" "That's not fair," Lucas countered, rolling up the plans with quick, agitated movements. "I fought for it because it matters to me, because I have a connection to it that Mark never did. A connection you're planning to demolish." Elaine stood, her earlier warmth completely evaporated. "You let me testify about preserving family legacy, about honoring your father's wishes, while all along you were planning this." Lucas felt a surge of the old resentment. "Since when are you the guardian of my mother's memory? You barely knew her." "I knew your father," Elaine shot back. "I know how much it would break his heart to see what you're planning." "Dad is gone," Lucas said firmly. "And this house is mine now." The court decided. Elaine gathered her purse with trembling hands. "Yes, it did. With my help." She moved toward the door, then turned back, her composure cracking. "You know what the irony is, Lucas? All these years, I thought you resented me for trying to replace your mother. But maybe what you really resented was that I couldn't." The words struck with precision, finding their mark. Before Lucas could respond, she was gone, the sound of her car engine revving in the driveway. Lucas sank onto the bar stool she'd vacated, his victory suddenly hollow. Through the kitchen windows, he could see the Pacific stretching endlessly toward the horizon. The same view that had comforted him through childhood grief, teenage angst, and adult uncertainty. His phone vibrated with a text from Julia. How did it go with Elaine? How could he explain what had just happened? The brief connection followed by deeper disconnection. The realization that perhaps he'd been wrong about Elaine all along, not because she'd tried to replace his mother, but because she'd respected his mother's memory more than he was currently doing. Not great. He texted back, simply. 3 dots appeared as Julia typed her response. "Want me to come over?" Lucas considered the offer. Julia had been his emotional anchor through the court proceedings. Her steady presence a counterbalance to his tumultuous feelings. But right now, he needed to be alone with the house, with the ghosts of his past, and the possibilities of his future. "I'm okay. Just need some time to think. He wandered through the house, seeing it with new eyes, not just as the backdrop to his childhood, but as the physical embodiment of his mother's taste and vision. The built-in window seats where she'd read him stories. The hand-stenciled border in the guest bathroom that she'd painstakingly painted herself. The custom kitchen cabinets she'd commissioned from a local craftsman. In his father's study, a masculine space of dark wood and leather, Lucas found himself opening drawers he'd never explored before. In the bottom drawer of the massive desk, beneath folders of household documents, he discovered a leather-bound photo album he'd never seen. He carried it to the leather armchair by the window and began turning pages. The album contained photos of the house during its renovation 35 years ago's mother. Young and radiant, directing contractors, reviewing fabric samples, painting trim, and planting the garden. Her passion for the project was evident. In every image, the final pages showed the completed house, with his parents standing proudly on the front steps. His mother, pregnant with him. On the last page, in his mother's elegant handwriting, was an inscription. A house is made of walls and beams. A home is built with love and dreams. Our legacy for our children, and their children after them. Lucas closed the album, a weight settling in his chest. He'd been so focused on reclaiming the house from Mark, on asserting his right to it, that he'd lost sight of what it truly represented. Just his personal history, but a legacy created with love and intention. As twilight descended, casting long shadows across the familiar rooms, Lucas found himself at his drafting table in what had once been his bedroom. With fresh paper before him, he began to sketch not a complete reimagining, but a thoughtful evolution that honored the original vision while allowing for his own contribution. The question that remained was whether this new approach would be enough to repair the rift with Ellen, and whether he even wanted to try. Chapter 4. Bridges. Burned and built. 3 weeks passed with no word from Elaine. Lucas threw himself into the initial phases of the house project, meeting with contractors and structural engineers, carefully selecting which elements to preserve and which to thoughtfully update. Each decision now came with greater deliberation, a weighing of past and future that he hadn't considered in his original plans. Julia visited often, bringing takeout and offering both legal and personal counsel as Lucas navigated the early stages of home ownership. On this particular evening, they sat on the terrace overlooking the ocean, sharing Thai food as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. "Have you tried calling her?" Julia asked, deftly maneuvering chopsticks around a piece of basil chicken. Lucas shook his head, pushing rice around his plate. "What would I say? Sorry, I'm not preserving the house exactly as it was for the last 30 years. Maybe thank you for supporting me in court would be a good start," Julia suggested gently. Followed by, "I've reconsidered some of my renovation plans." Lucas set down his chopsticks with a sigh. "You think I'm being unreasonable? I think," Julia said carefully, "that Elaine surprised you by being an ally when you needed one. And now you're struggling to reconcile that with the narrative you've maintained about her for 15 years. The accuracy of Julia's assessment was irritating. Lucas stood, moving to the stone balustrade that edged the terrace. Below, waves crashed against the cliffs in a rhythmic pattern that had been the soundtrack to his most formative years. "I found an album," he said, after a long pause. "Photos of my mother renovating this place. She transformed it completely from what it was before, just like I was planning to do." He turned to face Julia. "Isn't there some irony in Elaine defending my mother's vision when my mother herself was all about reinvention?" Julia joined him at the balustrade. "Maybe, or maybe Elaine was defending what that vision came to mean to your father, to you, to your family history." The distinction was uncomfortable, but clarifying. Lucas had been so focused on asserting his right to change the house that he hadn't fully considered what those changes might erase, not just physical details, but the meaning they held. "I've modified the plans," he admitted, "keeping more of the original features, being more selective about what I update." "That sounds like a good compromise," Julia said, resting her hand lightly on his arm. "And maybe something worth sharing with Elaine." Lucas nodded, knowing Julia was right, but still resistant to making the first move. Pride had always been his weakness, a trait his father had often pointed out with a mixture of frustration and grudging respect. The next morning, Lucas was reviewing material samples with his contractor when an unexpected visitor arrived. The doorbell echoed through the house, and Lucas opened the front door to find Mark standing on the threshold, looking distinctly uncomfortable in casual clothes, a far cry from his usual corporate attire. "Mark," Lucas said, surprise evident in his voice, "what are you doing here?" His half-brother shifted his weight, hands shoved in the pockets of his designer jeans. "Can I come in?" Lucas hesitated, then stepped aside. Mark entered, his gaze sweeping over the foyer with a complex expression that Lucas couldn't quite read. "I heard you're renovating," Mark said, following Lucas to the living room where material samples and paint chips were spread across the coffee table. "Word travels fast," Lucas replied. Watching his brother warily, Mark picked up a paint sample, examining the subtle grey-blue hue. "Elaine told my mother, who told Vanessa, who told me." He set the sample down carefully. "Family gossip chain. Still works efficiently, even after death." An awkward silence fell between them, filled only by the distant sound of the contractor measuring in another room. "Why are you here, Mark?" Lucas finally asked. Mark moved to the windows, gazing out at the view that had been the backdrop to their fractured shared childhood, Mark visiting on occasional weekends, Lucas living there full-time until college. "I was angry about the court decision," Mark admitted, his back still turned. "Felt like you got the sentimental prize, while I got stuck with the practical responsibility of running Dad's company." "You always wanted the company," Lucas pointed out. "I never did." "No, you didn't," Mark agreed, turning to face him. "You wanted this place." He gestured to the room around them. "I never understood why. It always felt like a museum, to me beautiful, but untouchable." The observation was surprisingly insightful coming from Mark, who Lucas had always perceived as caring only about financial value, not emotional or aesthetic worth. "That's part of why I'm renovating," Lucas explained cautiously, "to make it livable, not just preserved." Mark nodded, moving closer to examine the revised architectural plans on the side table. "These are good," he said, professional appreciation evident in his tone. "You always had talent." The compliment, so unexpected from his usually critical brother, momentarily disarmed Lucas. "Thanks," he managed. Mark straightened, seeming to come to some decision. "I didn't just come to see the renovations. I came because Elaine is heartbroken." Lucas stiffened. "She's the one who walked out." "Because you blindsided her," Mark countered, though without his usual aggression. "Look, I'm the last person who should be giving relationship advice, but Elaine was good to Dad, and she went out on a limb for you in court." "I know that," Lucas said defensively. "Do you?" Mark challenged. "Because from where I'm standing, you got what you wanted, and then shut her out, just like you've been doing since she married Dad." The accusation stung with its accuracy. "It's complicated," Lucas muttered. "Family always is," Mark agreed. He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew an envelope, placing it on the coffee table. "Dad left this with his attorney, with instructions to give it to whichever of us ended up with the house. I thought you should have it." Lucas stared at the envelope, his father's distinctive handwriting visible on the front. "I should go," Mark said, moving toward the door. He paused at the threshold of the living room. "For what it's worth, I think Mum would have liked your plans. She always said this place had good bones but needed someone with vision to bring it into the future." With a slight nod, he was gone, the front door closing quietly behind him. Lucas remained frozen, staring at the envelope. After several minutes, he picked it up, his fingers tracing his name written in his father's bold script. Breaking the seal, he withdrew a single sheet of paper. "Lucas, if you're reading this, it means the house is yours. As I always hoped it would be. You have your mother's eye for beauty and potential, something I recognized in you from an early age. This house was Laura's canvas, her creation. She poured her heart into every detail, just as you pour yours into your designs. But she also understood that houses, like the people who inhabit them, must evolve. The last thing she said to me about this place, before she became too ill to discuss such things, was that she hoped someday you would make it your own, not just inherit it but transform it, as she had done. Elaine has been a guardian of both our memories during our marriage. She understood my need to preserve what Laura created, even when it meant living in another woman's vision. Now it's time for new visionaries. Whatever you decide to do with this house, know that you have my blessing, and I believe you would have had your mother's as well. With pride and love, Dad. Lucas read the letter twice. Then a third time, his father's words gradually penetrating the protective barriers he'd built around his grief. The revelation that his mother had anticipated, Evan welcomed his eventual transformation of the house, lifted a weight he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. He picked up his phone and, before he could reconsider, dialed Elaine's number. Lucas, her voice was guarded when she answered. "I'd like to show you something," he said simply. "The revised plans for the house. And a letter from Dad that I think you should read." A pause, then, whenever you can, I'll be here." The line went quiet for so long that Lucas thought she might have hung up. Finally, she spoke, her voice softer. "I can come this afternoon. I'll be waiting," Lucas replied, feeling a cautious hope that perhaps not all bridges had been irreparably burned. Chapter 5. Legacy. Reimagine the late afternoon sun cast a golden glow across the terrace where Lucas waited, his father's letter and the revised architectural plans arranged on the table before him. He'd spent the morning with his contractor, finalizing decisions about which original features would be preserved: his mother's hand-stenciled borders, the custom cabinetry, the unique ceiling treatments, and which would be thoughtfully updated to create a home that honored the past while embracing the future. When Elaine's car pulled into the driveway, Lucas felt an unexpected nervousness. Their last encounter had ended badly, with wounds inflicted on both sides. He wasn't entirely sure why her opinion mattered to him now, after so many years of keeping her at a distance, but undeniably, it did. That Elaine appeared at the terrace entrance, dressed more casually than he was accustomed to seeing her: linen pants and a simple blouse, her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. She looked younger, more approachable, without the polished armor she typically wore. "Thank you for coming," Lucas said, standing to greet her. Elaine nodded, her expression guarded as she took the seat across from him. "You mentioned a letter from Richard." Lucas slid the envelope across the table. "Mark brought it yesterday. Dad left it with his attorney, with instructions that it go to whichever of us ended up with the house." Curiosity flickered across Elaine's features as she carefully removed the letter. Lucas watched her eyes move across the page, noting the subtle changes in her expression: surprise, understanding, and finally, a softening around her mouth. When she finished, she folded the letter carefully and returned it to its envelope. "He never told me about this conversation with Laura," she said quietly. "About her wanting you to eventually make changes. Would it have made a difference?" Lucas asked. "If you'd known." Elaine considered the question, her fingers tracing the edge of the envelope. "Perhaps, though I think what bothered me most wasn't the fact of the changes, but the way you seemed determined to erase rather than evolve." She met his gaze directly. "And the fact that you let me advocate for preserving a legacy you were planning to dismantle." "That's fair," Lucas acknowledged. "I should have been honest with you from the beginning." He spread out the revised plans, moving his chair closer so they could review them together. "These are the new designs. I've kept the soul of the house intact, while updating it for modern living." His finger traced the various spaces. "The library stays essentially as it is, just restored. The main living areas will be opened up somewhat, but the original millwork and ceiling details remain. The kitchen gets updated appliances but keeps Mum's custom cabinets." Elaine studied the plans with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions about materials and architectural choices. Her knowledge surprised him, though perhaps it shouldn't have, given her years married to a real estate developer. "This terrace," she noted, pointing to the ocean-facing side of the house. "You've expanded it." Lucas nodded. "It was always too narrow to really enjoy the view. I'm extending it and adding a pergola for shade. He hesitated, then added, Dad and I used to talk about doing that someday. Something shifted in Elaine's expression. He mentioned that to me once. Said it was one of the few things Laura hadn't gotten around to finishing before she became ill. The shared memory created an unexpected connection between them, a small thread of common ground in their separate relationships with his father. There's something else I wanted to show you, Lucas said, reaching for a leather-bound album on the side table. I found this in Dad's desk, photos of Mum renovating this place 35 years ago. He opened the album, revealing images of his young mother directing construction, painting woodwork, arranging furniture. Together, they turned the pages, Lucas occasionally sharing memories prompted by particular rooms or features. She was beautiful, Elaine said softly, studying a photo of Laura standing proudly in the completed living room. Richard kept her photo on his desk, you know? All 15 years we were married. I know, Lucas replied. That must have been difficult. Elaine shrugged slightly. I made my peace with it. Richard was capable of loving deeply, and that included both the past and the present. She closed the album gently. It's one of the things I admired most about him. The admission created space for a question Lucas had never allowed himself to ask. Did you love him? Really love him? Yes, Elaine answered without hesitation. Not the way Laura did. They were young together, built a life from scratch. Richard and I found each other later, with our separate histories and established identities, but yes, I loved him deeply. The simple honesty of her response dismantled something in Lucas, a barrier he'd maintained for years. A narrative about his father's second marriage that perhaps had never been accurate. I'm sorry, he said suddenly, the words emerging before he could reconsider them. For keeping you at a distance all these years. For assuming things about your marriage that weren't true. Elaine's surprise was evident, but she recovered quickly. We all have our protective mechanisms, Lucas. Mine was to maintain a perfect exterior, to never show vulnerability. Yours was to keep potential emotional threats at bay. A small smile softened her features. We're not so different, really. The observation startled a laugh from Lucas. Dad used to say something similar. Said we were both too stubborn to see how alike we were. He was a perceptive man, Elaine agreed, her smile widening slightly. They lapsed into a companionable silence, watching the sun begin its descent toward the Pacific. The sound of waves breaking against the cliffs below provided a soothing backdrop as they sipped the wine Lucas had poured. I'd like your input, Lucas said finally. On the renovation. You lived with Dad for 15 years, you know what mattered to him about this place. Elaine studied him, measuring his sincerity. Are you sure about that? I am, he confirmed. And I think Mum would appreciate another woman's perspective. From what Dad always said, she was very intentional about creating spaces that worked. For real life, not just for show. She was ahead of her time that way, Elaine observed. So many of these older estates prioritize formality over function. She hesitated, then nodded. I'd be honored to offer input, if that's what you want. It is, Lucas assured her. Though I should warn, I can be somewhat stubborn about my design vision. I would never have guessed, Elaine replied dryly. A hint of humor in her eyes. The moment of shared amusement felt like a small miracle. Tiny bridge spanning the chasm of misunderstanding that had separated them for so long. As twilight deepened around them, Lucas gathered the courage to ask one more question. Would you consider being involved beyond just advice? Maybe helping with some of the interior selections? He gestured to the house behind them. This place holds your history to 15 years of your life with Dad. It seems right that you should have a hand in its next chapter. Emotion flickered across Elaine's face, surprise, then a careful hope. I'd like that, she said simply. Over the following months, the renovation proceeded with both Lucas and Elaine involved. Julia was a frequent visitor, sometimes offering legal advice on contractor agreements, but more often simply enjoying the evolving dynamic between Lucas and his stepmother. On a warm afternoon in October, 6 months after the court decision, Lucas hosted a small gathering on the newly expanded terrace. Julia was there, along with Elaine, a few close friends, and even Mark and his wife, who had gradually established a more cordial relationship with Lucas. To new beginnings, Lucas proposed, raising his glass as the sun began to set over the Pacific, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. And honored endings, Elaine added softly, touching her glass to his. Later, as guests mingled throughout the partially renovated house, Julia found Lucas in the library, the one room already fully restored, with his father's books lining the shelves and his mother's reading chair positioned by the window. "You seem happy?" she observed, leaning against the doorframe. Lucas nodded, surveying the space with satisfaction. "I am. For the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm building something, not just preserving or destroying the past." "And Elaine?" Julia asked. "That relationship seems to have taken a surprising turn." "It has," Lucas acknowledged. "Turns out, when you stop seeing people as threats to your narrative and start seeing them as complex humans with their own stories, connections become possible." Julia smiled, moving to stand beside him at the window. "Your mother would be proud, you know. Not just of what you're doing with the house, but of who you're becoming in the process." Lucas felt a peace he hadn't experienced since before his father's death, perhaps even longer. The house around them was in transition, partially renovated and partially preserved. Much like his understanding of his family history, not erased, not frozen in time, but thoughtfully evolved. Outside on the terrace, he could see Elaine in conversation with Mark, their interaction marked by an ease that hadn't existed during the court battle. She caught his eye through the window, and offered a small smile of acknowledgement, not quite maternal, not merely friendly, but something uniquely their own. A relationship built not on obligation or circumstance, but on choice and growing understanding. The house would never be exactly what his mother had created, nor what his father had preserved, nor even precisely what Lucas had initially envisioned. Instead, it was becoming something more valuable, a true legacy, shaped by multiple hands across time, each contributing their vision while respecting what came before. As the last light of day gilded the ocean beyond the cliffs, Lucas felt a certainty that had eluded him for years. Some inheritances weren't about property at all, but about the capacity to honor the past while building toward the future. And sometimes, the most unexpected allies were the ones who helped you understand that truth. If this story of family redemption and unexpected connections resonated with you, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel. Your support allows us to continue bringing these emotionally rich narratives to life. In the comments, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Was Lucas right to renovate, or should he have preserved his mother's vision? Have you ever misjudged someone the way Lucas misjudged Elaine? And what family legacies, material or emotionally, have shaped your own life? Subscribe now for more stories that explore the complex terrain of family relationships, inheritance, and the bridges we build across generations. Your next emotional journey is just a click away.